I was just watching some videos today randomly, just looking for interesting things as a scavenger of knowledge might do. And came across one by another one, excuse me, excellent one by Truth is Stranger Than Fiction about money and how we all contribute to the problems associated with all sorts of currency and corruption and all that. But as I kind of started talking to someone in the comments there about it, the issue of barter came up, and I thought that I would just share some thoughts that are rolling around in my head about that. This is an article that I'm sharing on the screen here that I did some years ago on a lot of basic things like education and government and so forth, and discuss the issue of money as it relates to barter and the problems that we haven't learned our history, haven't learned our lessons. I have a lot of things about that on my website. As you can see here, you just go to my feather.net and look for features, and you'll see the one on money. And I say here that money is not intrinsically evil, but in fact necessary. Barter only works on the smallest scale for limited time, so there needs to be a medium of exchange accepted by everyone as fairly representing the value of labor. And the problem is, let me just by way of illustration, suppose that I make bread for a living and I make 5 loaves a day. Okay, so 1 loaf of bread represents 20% of a day's labor. So suppose in the course of making bread, I badly cut my wrist, and I've cut an artery and I need immediate medical attention. Okay, so I go to somebody who can provide immediate medical attention and they save my life because otherwise I would have bled to death. And it only takes them, 20% of their day, the same amount of time it takes me to make 1 loaf of bread. Is our labor really equal? Is it just time? Now, granted, this person saved my life, but on the other hand, if they didn't have food, they couldn't help anybody either. So in a roundabout way, I save their life if I provide food that they need. And what about other people like the farmers who grow the wheat that I made my bread out of? And they use tools that are made of metal that somebody else dug out of the ground and somebody else turned into a useful instrument. It gets complicated. It takes a lot of people with different skills, and one person's hour of labor is not necessarily equal to another person's hour of labor. So what do you do then? Do you say that if the person, the doctor or whoever heals my cut artery, that I should only pay them with 1 loaf of bread? Or the doctor who used sutures and medicines to save my life, should they only be paid in, say, 1 lump of coal or an ounce of iron ore? You have to think about these things through. And I recall vaguely a lesson from American history where some of the earliest settlements tried to get around this problem by saying, okay, kind of the old communist idea of each as their ability to each as their need, where they had everybody just do whatever all summer. And then at the harvest, the food was distributed to everyone as they had need. Well, the next year, everybody starved because the people who did the most work realized that they would not get to keep the fruit of their labor and it would be given to lazy people. So they didn't work. They said, why should I if the things I produced are given away to people who produce nothing? So then what do? Do you have some kind of public ledger of hours worked and skill required to do that work? That sounds an awful lot like the blockchain, which is used by cryptocurrency, where there's a public ledger of every exchange. And what if you did that with just hours of labor and waited somehow for someone's skill? And then you have arguments over whose skill is most necessary and whose production, whose labor is worth what per hour. And then to decide how to trade that for other people's labor, because that's essentially the issue. And again, if you have no concern over the value of a person's labor and people just do whatever and share it willingly and everybody has everything for free, You have to deal with the problem of human fault, human nature, because people get lazy and some get dishonest and will steal things from other people. And then you have the issue of, okay, this is human nature. There's always going to be some bad people. What do you do with them? Do you have police? Do you have, everything in public and somebody guarding the public record? And what happens if those people guarding become corrupt? I don't honestly know how to fix this problem, but I'm just making the point that it isn't as simple as we'd like. You can't just say, let's get rid of money. I'm not saying that Truth is Stranger Than Fiction said that either. They also said the problem is humans. And that's all I'm saying too. But the question on finding a solution is, I think what it boils down to is you have to change human nature in everybody in society. And only God can do that. But in the meantime, what do we do? I'm not sure if there's a better solution than some kind of money. And then people just decide through free market, quote unquote, if that can be left alone, how much of this money is worth a certain amount of goods or services. You can see here on the screen that there are certain properties of anything that's to be called money. One is it needs to be interchangeable such that every unit is equal to every other unit and should be anonymous ideally, because once you start tracking it, and that's again what the blockchain does. People say you can track it, but that depends on the parties involved volunteering their information. And the exchanges are the choke points, but that's a whole different issue. And not only is it to be interchangeable, it has to be divisible. That is to say, broken down into the smallest thing worth bothering with. And you should be able to it should be portable. You should be able to carry it around, or if it's digital, be able to send it safely and receive it safely. And the problem with barter or physical money is distance. Even in old days, people had to cart or sail large amounts of very heavy stuff to do business at a distance. So barter really only works on a very local level. And even then, the problem with barter is that suppose that you have something that Bob over here has, you have something that Bob wants, but Bob doesn't want what you have to trade for it. So Bob has to go get Susie, who has something you want, and hope that Susie has what Bob wants so they can trade, and then Bob can get from you what he wanted. See, barter doesn't work very well on any kind of scale, because you always have to have the problem of finding somebody who will give you what you want for what you have, and then make multiple trades sometimes to get just one thing you wanted. That's why people came up with money. Also going down this list, money should be, whatever this exchange thing is, should be durable, non-consumable, so it has value, but people don't use it for other things, and it should be scarce so that people can't just literally pick things off the ground and say, here, give me this thing I just picked up for your loaf of bread. So, and then I go on here to explain that what fiat means. It means by decree. It means legislated into something that we call money. That's a fiat currency. And it could be even something physical like gold. It could be decreed that gold is money and that only certain people can produce gold, get it out of the ground, and stamp it into coins to keep it scarce so that you can't just pick it off the ground. But you can go on to read that, all the other little things. It's not really a long article, but the problem is how to solve the problem. You have to deal with human nature. It's all well and good to say, let's just trade stuff, or let's just not worry about trading and everybody do something. But then you have to have somebody else going around making sure and enforcing that everyone is doing something? And what about people who can't do something? Then they're dependent on other people's labor, and who has to give it to them? And who is going to enforce the giving? And then you become the thing that we all hate, like the IRS saying, okay, we're going to take stuff from you, whether you like it or not, to give to people who can't do anything that you may or may not even know exist. Corruption is a problem to deal with at every possible point. And again, as long as human nature is what it is, I don't think there's a good way to solve the problem. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, what are we going to do that's the best stopgap measure until Jesus comes back and everybody's nature is, only people who want him to change their nature will exist anymore on earth. And it will be that paradise everybody imagines if they only didn't care about money. Like supposedly what Star Trek had their ideal society, their pie in the sky society where nobody needed money. But, well, you still had political intrigue and power trips and all those sorts of things, even in Star Trek Utopia. But the problem is, again, how does society function and deal with human corruption and human laziness? And the fact that, for example, I don't know about anybody else, but if I have a problem with one of my teeth, I don't want Farmer Brown to pull it with his pliers and no painkiller. But to have modern dentistry, so-called, just to use an example, you need quite a lot of complex infrastructure. You need those people mining metals out of the ground, and then other people who will shape them into precise tools, and other people who will know how to sterilize the tools, people who study anatomy to know the best way to deal with a tooth and to heal it afterwards, and what to do if there's a complication, such as dry socket if you pull the tooth. That's complicated. And you have to have a way to deal with that. If it's barter, I'm still thinking the dentist won't take a loaf of bread or two to take care of my tooth problem. So, and the question is brought up about usury. What is that? Well, to understand, at least from a biblical perspective, what that is and what it isn't any and every loaning of money. What usury is if somebody, the way things were supposed to work is if somebody needed to borrow money, a necessity, you were supposed to give them the money and just let them pay back when they're able, and you do not charge interest for that. But if somebody just wants to make a profit in business and they need money to start and they have to borrow it, you have every right to charge them interest for that because they're profiting and it is not a necessity. So usury is not any and all interest. It's only charging interest to someone who had a necessity and you took advantage of their poverty or their need. That's usury. So interest by itself is not intrinsically evil, but what's evil in our modern economy especially is fractional reserve lending. Okay, because money is created out of nothing. Money appears out of thin air. As soon as you borrow money, they write the number in their bank ledger and say, okay, now you got to pay me back with your labor, with real stuff. When the money that they loaned you didn't come from them. It came from numbers on a piece of paper. And that's the big scandal is fractional reserve lending. They're giving you stuff they didn't even have and making you pay it back with real goods and services. So these are all complicated issues. Most of them had to do with human frailty, which is basically either greed or laziness, and with the control issues that are associated with those things, because you have to, like I said, guard the ledger of labor performed and make sure everybody who gets something also gave something. And then the problem with barter being, of course, that what you want to trade for what somebody else has isn't necessarily what they want. So you have to do a bunch of complicated sub-trades till you get something that that other person wants that will give you what you originally wanted. So I don't know that there's a clean solution in a corrupt world for this problem. What it all boils down to is the fact that we have allowed central banks to be so controlling and so uncontested in their ability to do fractional reserve lending that effectively they just siphon all of our labor into their coffers until they own the whole world, and we are slaves on the land that we fought for, that are, as somebody put it, that our ancestors fought for. And that's how it always goes, because human corruption. So the question is not whether we willingly cause the problem ourselves. A lot of times we do, but how we would solve this problem. Even if we all lived off the land and had no money, but we produced food, we're going to produce more than we need, hopefully, and trade with somebody who doesn't have the particular crop that we grew. But you're still back at square one, where some people will want something from you that you don't want from them to trade, or you don't keep track of whether or not they did a fair day's work. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell anybody. I'm just, like I said, off the top of my head going, how do you solve this problem? Because you can't just say, let's barter. You can't just say, let's get rid of money. You can't just say cashless is evil. You can't just say that cryptos are good or bad. It's just not that simple. And here again, even if people are all living off the land, all it takes is a few people with weapons and a bunch of people who agree with them to go use their weapons to take over somebody else's land or make you their slave so that you'll produce food for them. All they have to do is threaten your life or threaten your children's life or shoot your dog or whatever it is, and they're in charge. So again, it comes back to human corruption. And what do you do about that in the meantime? I don't know. You can go to my website and see the thing on government that I was musing about, some things about how society should operate and how education would be done. But these are all idealistic. And so whenever people talk about money and barter and crypto and all those things, it's just never as simple as it's usually presented. And I don't know. I'm just saying that I decided to use this illustration of me baking bread and hurting myself in the process and needing somebody's help. And that person got their tools from somebody else. And neither of those people could eat if I didn't bake the food. And so it's all so intertwined. And it's really hard to put values on those things. And even, like I said, if you live in a very small off-the-land community, somebody there is not going to pull their weight. And if they don't, somebody else there has to enforce that they pull their weight. And somebody else there is going to be unable to pull their weight. And then you have to deal with theft or other issues that come up with, petty arguments and people saying you should be punished for something you did or said. And so we're going to take your food away or whatever it is. It gets complicated. And I don't know that there really is a solution in this life without God himself coming back to set everything straight. I mean, the Bible even says that when Jesus does come back, he will rule with a rod of iron. That is to say, an iron scepter, zero tolerance for sin. And I think if human history has proved anything, it's that people cannot govern themselves. They can't exchange goods and services. And about all you can do, all the practical advice I can possibly give is to just do the best in the flawed system that we have and try to be good stewards of what you do have control of, because that's all God's going to judge us on in the end anyway, is what did you do with what you were given? If you were born in slavery, as we all are, how did you conduct yourself? And if you had, money or goods or services or abilities, what did you do with them? We're never going to solve the problem of fixing society by fixing money or getting rid of the bankers or, getting rid of police. That's the problem with human nature. So, that's about all I had to say. and this was the easiest way to say it real quick, is just using Google Hangouts, even though I didn't really expect anybody to show up. All I can do is say I've got a couple hundred other videos if anybody's bored, like I was when I was looking at the money videos, or I've got like 640 posts on my blog. So there's stuff to read there if anybody is bored. For the most part, I don't join groups anymore because betrayal. So anyway, thanks for the few who showed up. Hope you have a good day. And as soon as I find the off button on whichever window I'm trying to click on, I'll stop the broadcast and see y'all some other time.